Well, good morning. Happy Monday to you. And I hope you're having a great day so far. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day. Um, it is good to be together on this beautiful Monday, and I pray God's richest blessings on you today. Wow, what a weekend, huh? So, Friday, I don't know if we did anything Friday, but Saturday was the movie that was produced by the Vail Preservation Society. Actually, it was produced by Gerald Lamb. So J.J. Lamb is the executive director of the Vail Preservation Society, and it's a society that was formed to restore the historic post office. And that restoration is actually well underway. Of the probably $7 million that it'll take to rebuild the post office, a good chunk of that has been raised. There's probably still, I would say, $200,000 to $300,000 that needs to be raised to finish everything the way that it should be. But with the amount of money that's been raised, the outside is protected, the roof is protected, the foundation is protected, and you should be able to go inside it and see at least some form or some semblance of it. Because it's a historic building, a couple things. One is it's harder to restore, and two, there are rules and regulations as to how you restore a historic building. But it is a pre-statehood building in Vail, and it really defined Vail from when the railroad came through in 1880 until the post office kind of stopped being the post office. But it is a historic. It's right across the street from the shrine, built in 1835 or 1935. Which is where downtown Vail is, and downtown Vail would be something more than it is today if it were not for the railroad. The north and southern branches of the railroad cut off Vail from the north and the south, so everything that's between the railroad tracks is very, very, very historic, but very, very hard to develop and get to because of the railroad tracks. And so Vail is a very odd, let me put it that way, it's an odd place. Our downtown can't be developed because of the railroad tracks, and the downtown is there because of the railroad tracks. So it's a whole thing's an oxymoron. Anyway, so before the railroad, there was, in 1858, John Butterfield established or received the contract from the federal government to do a mail route service from St. Louis, Missouri to San Francisco. And it had to go in 24 days. The mail route had to deliver the mail within 24 days. And so John Butterfield of New York was given the contract by the federal government to do this, which he did. And he actually, the first inauguration of the mail happened, and he did it in 22 days. I think by contract it had to be 22. And after a certain number of days, maybe like 35, there was a penalty. But the goal of the contract was basically 24 days. And he did it in 22, which is absolutely amazing when you think about it. Every minute counted. Because if they said that if it lost a minute in every section, it would be like 25 hours late or something like that. So, I mean, it was an amazing feat, and it brought, but the most important thing, and this is what came out in the movie, is, or it's more of a documentary, is that Tucson was nothing. There was really no way to get to Tucson. It was this little village coming up from Mexico, and it wasn't really connected to the rest of the world. And it was really the Butterfield Trail, the Butterfield stagecoach that opened up Tucson along this line from San Francisco to St. Louis. Up until the Butterfield Trail, Tucson was just a village of people. And they didn't go anywhere. They didn't do anything. They didn't really interact with the outside world. But the Butterfield stagecoach allowed this little town called Tucson to connect to the rest of the world, which gave Tucson incredible importance. And after the Civil War, the Civil War, basically in 1861, the Butterfield Trail kind of went away. And then by 1880, it was the train, which opened up Tucson to the greater world. And most people don't realize this, but the train track started in San Francisco and also, I guess you could say maybe St. Louis or Chicago or New Orleans. And it started coming each direction from the west and the east. And they met in Texas. And they completed the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, Southern Pacific Railroad, I think in 1881, I think is when they drove the Silver Spike to somewhere in the middle of Texas. They drove the Silver Spike to complete it. And then they took the Silver Spike out because they didn't want people wrecking the railroad. I think that's an interesting story. And then from 1880 on, Tucson became a stop on the railroad track. And that's how Tucson became a significance. It was the seat of this area for a long time. It held a strong importance for this area for a strong time. And then, of course, when Phoenix came to existence, Phoenix, the interesting thing about Phoenix is that around 28th Avenue in Van Buren, there were wild growing pumpkins. And so some people called that area Pumpkinville, other people, but when they wanted to name Phoenix, there were a whole bunch of names that were put forth. One of them was Salinas, Salinas, because of the Salt River, Salinas. Anyway, but it ended up being Phoenix. Somebody was a historian of Greek mythology and said, hey, listen, there was these ruins, and out of these ruins, we're going to build a city. I'm going way, way off. So the movie, the documentary was so good, because it tells a little bit of the story from a firsthand account. So one of the people that was there in Tucson when the first stagecoach came through died in 1935, and they got her history. And she told about how all the people of Tucson came out to see this strange stagecoach. I mean, they had stagecoaches, but she knew, she was 8 years old or 11 years old at the time of the first Butterfield stagecoach coming through Tucson. And she gave an account in 1935. She remembered back and gave an account of what it was like when that happened and how transformative it was for Tucson, because she lived in Tucson. So she lived in Tucson for a long time. Well, yeah, I mean, if she was 11 in 1858, that means she was born in, she's been 90 years old in 1935, telling about how Tucson was transformed because of the Butterfield stagecoach from 1858 until her death in 1935, whenever she died. And so some of the documentary, she is narrated as telling her story. And it was really, really well done. I mean, extremely well done. And the experts that they had talking about the Butterfield Express, Butterfield Overland Express, was, these are experts in the field talking about the historical significance. And one of the guys there has walked the whole entire Butterfield Trail probably more than anybody. And that's interesting too, because apparently nobody knows for sure where it is, but there's a couple different routes. The actual designated route by the United States government goes on the north frontage road of the North Track. So from my house, the North Track is 250 feet from my house. And so the Butterfield Trail is probably 150 feet from my house. And that is where the historic designation is. But the people who've actually walked it have said it's more by the Quick Mart. It goes through where the Quick Mart is. But we do know that the 1880 train, I know where that is because it's still there. And then, of course, there was a huge community of Vail that existed from 1880 all the way until well, till today, but as Tucson gained more prominence and Vail became less prominent, Vail never did become a town, and it will never become a town. We'll be incorporated by Vail, by Tucson, which is unfortunate because we have just as as much right to incorporation as Tucson does. We are more historic, I think, than Tucson is. I shouldn't say that. Tucson had the Presidio. I mean, Tucson has definitely got its own history that should be celebrated. But Vail was an important part. Vail, Benson, Dragoon, all these major Butterfield train stations, in their own right, should be celebrated. But it's just history. It's just history. I keep telling J.J. Lamb, because some of the stories that come out of Vail, I think, are just as incredible and intriguing as the ones that come out of Tombstone, as the ones that come out of Vail, the Tucson Presidio. We, in our own right, should be on the map. There's absolutely no question about it. And we will always be on the map because at least the historic downtown Vail will remain an important part of history of Arizona, for sure, whether or not we're incorporated or not. All that stuff will remain an important part of our history. All right. What else? So that was on Saturday. And then Saturday night, we did our first Saturday night get-together. When we started Christ Youth from Vail, it was a meeting of people on Sunday night. And they met for about a year. I joined them about halfway through that, but they had been meeting for about a year and developed some really strong relationships. And from that came a worship service. Well, we're kind of following the same model. We're building a group of people on Saturday night. And the goal is to build some friendships and relationships between, I think we had, 17 people there. Build the relationships between those people. And then start inviting people into that group, and then see if we launch a Saturday night worship from that, or something else. I don't know. It may just remain a group of people that meet on Saturday night. But one of the things that happened, one of the great things that can happen, let me put it that way, when you've got a group of and these are a group of mature Christians. Oh my goodness, phenomenally mature Christians. One of the things that can happen is that if there's somebody hurting or in need of prayer, you can bring them to that group and we can pray over that person. And it's going to be a potluck. It's going to be a little bit of scripture, a little bit of singing. I mean, it's just really going to be, I think, a great event. And it'll because originally when we built the multi-purpose sanctuary, we thought we would use it for weddings, but even though it's a great venue and we've got some good stuff for weddings, we need like about another $50,000 to $100,000 to really clean up the campus to make it attracted, so brides would be attracted to it. And then even with that, you've got to do the wedding and then you got to reset the room after the wedding for Sunday morning worship. And it has turned out to be more work than we thought it would be. And moving those chairs out and in of the sanctuary takes 2 people 2 hours. I mean, they're huge, heavy chairs, and they have to be stacked like 12 high or 10 high to get them into the storage room. And it's just not feasible. So that means that the campus was really available for Saturday night. So the next option, or probably the better option when you think about it, is to do a Saturday night event where we can minister to our local community and bring people in. I really would like to see that community grow more from people hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ and not like transfer growth from other churches. I mean, I really would like to see it as being something that spreads the gospel as it was in the early church, where basically people heard about Jesus and they were attracted to it and they started joining, and basically that is what I'm hoping for. So that's what we prayed for on Saturday night, that we would get growth in the kingdom because of what we're doing on Saturday night. So that was Saturday night. Then Sunday we had worship, and then Sunday afternoon was bingo. Oh, and during worship, we brought up all the kids that are going to the National Youth Gathering, And we brought them up onto the stage, and they made their plea. We have to raise about $16,000 for the youth to go to the National Youth Gathering. I think the youth will come up with about half of that. So we're looking about raising $8,000. There's different ways to do that. I think the bingo last night probably brought in $2,000 or $3,000. So maybe 2 or 3 bingos will do it. But the other thing is that rather than do a lot of little fundraisers, I think what they would like to do is just, some larger fundraisers. One of them, probably the main fundraiser, is to put a tree out in the lobby. And the tree would be filled with envelopes. And then you take an envelope, and it's either $50 or $100 or $1,000, and you say, I'll put that money in the envelope and bring it back. And the people that have done this at other churches can sometimes fund the whole entire youth gathering just from an envelope tree. Because different people have different abilities to give at different times in their life. There have been times in my life when God has blessed me with the ability to give quite a bit, and I'm sure the same is true with other people too. So, all right. So that was Sunday, and then of course today's Monday. All right, and here we are halfway through the podcast, and we haven't started our study, so I apologize for that. There is a birthday today, and I'm not even going to bring it up. Chuck Burzbach. Happy birthday, Chuck. Today's your birthday. And he preached for us 2 weeks ago, and I keep hearing from everybody about a great job that he did preaching. So I'm grateful for that. And that's not the last time you saw Chuck, and there's a couple other people in the wings that are going to support Chuck. One of the things I'm trying to do after COVID, there was a lot of stuff going on, and there wasn't the ability to travel, so I didn't really go anywhere, and I really haven't traveled a lot since COVID. But now that COVID's over, it's 5 years since COVID. I'm looking for other leaders in our congregation that can cover for me when I'm gone, because I'm going to go do some fundraising, and I'm going to go spend some time with my grandchildren. So so the people that you're going to see over the summer are people that you have seen in our congregation that are going to cover for me when I'm gone. And I'm very excited for that. They're going to do a great job. All right. And Chuck is one of those. And let's see. Is that everything? I think that's everything. If you get the opportunity, I want to say this. If you get the opportunity to see this documentary on the Butterfield, it's called Dusting Off the Butterfield Trail. You have to see it. Hopefully it'll be on YouTube at some point. It would not surprise me if it's submitted to some historical societies for awards, because it was so well done. The Vail Preservation Society, Gerald Lamb, has been filming and doing a lot of stuff. He does these things called Voices of Vail, which are these little 5 to 15-minute movies that are on YouTube that talk about different aspects of Vail, and it's all oral history that's been put into movies. And they're really, really, really well done. And because of that history, he's been able to put together 2 full-length documentaries, and this is the second of them. And it's really good. It is really, really good. And I commend Gerald on this. All right. And JJ too, because she gave birth to Gerald. And she speaks in it. But Gerald is the king of this. It's a love thing for him. I don't think he makes any money off of it. It's a love sacrifice. It's a lifestyle choice, you would say. All right. Let's get into our study. We'll just briefly get into it. We're now going into the Gospel of Mark. Mark, it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. But in the history of people listing out the 4 Gospels, sometimes it's listed twice. It's in the second position. Sometimes it's listed in the 4th position. There is, it's the shortest of all of them. And so Matthew is written to a Jewish audience. Luke is written to a Greek audience, but it's Greek. Luke is more of a historian. He's a guy that sets out to try to get as much history as he can and put into some sort of chronological order. John, when he wrote his gospel, he was writing it as a follower of Jesus, and he wanted to get his story out about who he thought Jesus was. And so he talks about Jesus different than the other three gospels. But Mark is the shortest. And so a lot of people have given Mark less credibility, but there are a lot of scholars now who say that Mark may have been the very first gospel, that maybe Mark wrote his gospel, and then Matthew and Luke, and to an extent John, took pieces of Mark and inserted it into what they were writing. Who is Mark? Well, it doesn't say for sure. It's just Mark. History has said that it is John Mark. John Mark was with Peter in Rome, and that Mark may have been the person that took the stories of Peter and wrote them down. And this is what I ascribe to. I believe that John Mark was the John Mark that was with Peter, and that when Peter told his story, he told it to Mark, and Mark wrote it down. And as we go through this, we might see some things as to why I believe that. That is not I would say the larger view of things. I believe that what happens over time is that the story of Jesus is so powerful that there are people that want to make money off of it. So, for example, Mark maybe comes from Alexandria, which is in the northern part of Africa, right near Egypt. And so if you're the church in Alexandria, you highlight the fact that Mark is from your place, and you start creating lore and history about Mark because it helps your town grow. It helps your town get significance. If you're from Rome, you say that Mark was in Rome for a while. I mean, there's everybody that wants to claim ownership of this guy, but who was he? And as we go through here, see if Peter has a bit more prominence in this gospel than any of the other disciples. And if you see that, then it makes sense that Mark is talking to Peter and he is writing Peter's story down. Now, the downside to that is you could say, well, why not call it the gospel according to Peter as interpreted by Mark? And that is a good question. But we do know that it's a Mark. I believe that he was with Peter. He got firsthand account from Peter of all these things about Jesus. And I think eventually either Peter died or Mark went in his own direction. And when he wrote this all down, I think he wanted to give credit that he was, writing it down, or according to Mark. And we'll get into that when we start reading it. The date of this depends upon when the thing was written. I think most scholars would say 50 or 60, definitely not 70 AD. Why 70 AD? Because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. And anybody writing after 70 AD would have, because the temple was such a prominent figure in Christianity and in Judaism, all this stuff has to be written before the temple was destroyed. Otherwise, it would have been referenced. A lot of people put it in between 50 and 60 AD. So we're talking about 30 years, 25, 30 years after Jesus is when the Gospel of Mark would have been written. I subscribe to that. I think it's very early on. I think it is the first of the Gospels to be written. The audience is not a Jewish audience because some of the things that Mark says, he's explaining Jewish things to the audience. Well, you wouldn't explain Jewish things to people who are Jewish. So Matthew is written for a Jewish audience. You can tell through the whole thing. Matthew's trying to explain to Jews how Jesus is the promised Messiah. And you can tell that Matthew's written to a Jewish audience. This is not written to that audience. This is written more to a Gentile audience. It could be Gentiles in Rome. It could be in Gentiles in Alexandria. It could be Gentiles in Antioch. Probably not a whole lot in Jerusalem. The Roman Empire, not entirely sure where or who these non-Jewish people were, but for sure, Mark is written to us because we are not Jewish. It's the shortest of the Gospels. It's the most concise of the Gospels. Yeah, what else do I want to say about Mark? That's just what I believe. Oh my goodness, it's time. Oh, I'm so sorry. So I'm excited about this study. I think we will highlight some of the differences between Mark and the rest of the Gospels. And I'll just say this, the end of Mark is fascinating. Some of the manuscripts of Mark do not include like the last chapter of Mark. It ends with the women going to the tomb and Jesus is not there. And that is a fascinating thing to think about. And so I believe that adds credibility to the whole Gospel of Mark, an incredible amount of credibility to it. And we'll talk about that when we get to those chapters. But I'm excited to go through Mark, and I think you will too. It's I believe, a true and raw form of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you will enjoy. I'm sure that you'll enjoy it as a very, very huge blessing on Christianity. So we'll actually, I guess, start reading it tomorrow. Maybe I'll spend a little bit more time on who Mark is, but maybe not. We'll see, because I want to get through it, and I have a feeling that we may have a couple months in front of us. All right. So anyway, let's close in prayer. Gracious God, thanks for this day. And thank you for the opportunity to continue studying your word. Until we meet again, keep us in your grace. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Let me go over here real quick and see. Oh, thank you so much for all of you for joining this morning online. I appreciate it. And hope you have a great day. And we will get into this tomorrow. God's blessings, and we'll see you later. Take care. Bye.